Good evening and welcome to Bible study for Wednesday, December 2nd, not January yet, excuse me, uh, for Wednesday, December 2nd. Thank you all for joining me. I do apologize that it appears last week the different pieces of our normal Wednesday rundown and our special Thanksgiving worship were in the wrong order when they were broadcast on NEK TV, and so I do apologize for those of you who missed out what you were looking for. And all of those pieces, all of those worships, and Bible study for last week are still available on YouTube. But again, apologies for that particular mix-up. We have an exciting week to look forward to, absolutely. After this broadcast at 6 o'clock will be the rebroadcast of last Sunday's first Sunday of Advent, which is a retrospective and a reflection on the deep hope, but also the challenge of remembering the history of the foundation of this nation, and especially the way we celebrate that history through Thanksgiving, yes, but also in our remembrance of our origins in our pilgrim forefathers, which in our particular denomination, that's where we came from. That's why we're here. That's the beginning of this church in this part of the world, where this church has had so much strength and so much significance for so long. But it was a small group of people who could not stand to give up a moral stand they had taken, who had become illegal in their own land, and who were seeking something new. And of course, after that was a very conflicted legacy, but more on that from last week's worship, which will be broadcast in just a little bit. In upcoming news, of course, we're very excited next Sunday, to welcome a sermon given by United Church of Newport member in discernment, Mary Hoadley, who has done an incredible job of doing seminary remotely, did a really wonderful job doing her church internship down at the Orleans Federated Church, partially during the pandemic. An incredible challenge, does wonderful work at the Wellness Center, and brings us a wonderful message for our upcoming Peace Sunday, the second Sunday of Advent. But for right now, we are gathered for Bible study to take some time to reflect on Scripture that we otherwise might not be able to. In the cycle of the year, we cover a lot of ground. We cover a lot of ground. And as is our tradition in our church and in our denomination, we are free to interpret Scripture. We have that great liberty, and that great liberty should really never be undervalued, nor should it be neglected, nor should it be forgotten. So we take these opportunities for in this midweek broadcast to put forward something of Scripture that is maybe more challenging, more contested, especially because if there is one absurd idea, is that there's only one way to read the Bible, or in fact to read any part of the Bible. So today we're going to be reading from the Gospel according to Mark, and we're going to be reading from very, very close to the end of the Gospel according to Mark, which is the shortest of the Gospels by far. We're going to be reading from right near the end, from when the author of Mark gets really right down into the nitty-gritty as far as they are concerned, certainly. Because it is at last Jesus talking of what is to come. The final events, the Jesus' arrest, trial, and crucifixion and resurrection happen in rapid succession in the very, very end of Mark. And like other Gospels, a lot of great significance happens at the Last Supper, but especially during the week that precedes Easter. That's why we celebrate that as Holy Week. That's why that time is of such great significance, and why that time is really so important to focus on in terms of listening to Jesus, in terms of actually reading his words as they are left to us. Now, Mark, the gospel, focuses always on the moving Jesus. He is always urgently on to the next thing, moving, 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 which to some extent contrasts with some of the other gospels where, if we're going to be really honest, Jesus is always eating. Um, so the moving gospel versus the eating gospels. Um, we finally come on here near the end, in chapter 13 out of 16, to Jesus speaking of what is to come next. And the passage we're going to read comes right after Jesus trying to fit in right at the end of his ministry, warnings for those who have come with him and those who will follow them. Warnings about the pitfalls of community and of faith and of church, and especially the pitfalls of servant leadership, the pitfalls of trying to minister to people, and as we'll see, trying to minister to a wide variety of people. So let's begin. Our reading is from Mark chapter 13. It's verse 24 until through to the end at verse 37. And I'm reading from my primary Bible, especially for the Old Testament. It's a Revised Standard Version, Oxford annotated, with some, by comparison to the Robert Alter Old Testament that we often use. It has very, very light annotations. Of course, the language is not so far removed from us, if for no other reason than Koine Greek is, in which these scriptures were first written down. Sorry, the dog has something nice to chew on. It's having a good time over there. Us, it's not so far removed from the Greek that is spoken today and has been studied at far greater length than over the years. So, Mark chapter 13, verse 24. But in those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and then he will send out angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away before all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day or that hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed, watch, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on watch. Watch, therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at the cockcrow, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch. So these are words preached in the temple, not too long after the cleansing of the temple. Not too long after the so-called cleansing of the temple, when Jesus drove out the money changers, and threw over their counting tables, and abolished for a short period the really abusive system of financial manipulation that existed in conjunction with the temple and the system of financial manipulation that he denounced when he said that, that the money changers had turned the temple into a marketplace rather than a holy place, a place where people were given bad deals constantly. So this is again in that same place and speaking to a great crowd, speaking not just to the 12, but speaking to many about grand and significant things that were to come. Some terrifying, of course, but also clearly some very positive. The comparison that is made that from the fig tree, to learn the lesson from the fig tree and know as soon as its branches become tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. That's a good thing. Winter is over, summer is coming. The dark time is over. The bright time is coming. That all of this, that the sun going black, the stars not shining, the moon not giving any light, are all are all signs, not and I mean not of the end, but of a great transition and a great reforming. You'll also, of course, see some comparisons, and perhaps even if I didn't say what I was reading from at the beginning, you might think I was reading from the book of the Revelation, which, as we did a couple of weeks ago, that the comparison is strong, and actually even more strongly, there's just before the passage we read, um, the verse is, and then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or look, there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show signs and wonders to lead astray, and if possible, the elect. But take heed, I have told you all these things beforehand. That's that's a verse that's compared with the idea that's really blown into a huge cultural phenomenon, of the Antichrist. Now, Antichrist specifically is only mentioned in in the letters of John, which are some of the last letters, last epistles, and letters that we really don't talk about very much, especially because, well, their provenance, their validity, their reality is challenged more heavily than a lot of other letters, and there's just not maybe that much to draw from them. What they talk about Antichrist is really not what we would associate with Antichrist, which is often like a giant horned demon kind of a thing, which is what the Revelation uses its poetic license to describe the servant of the devil who will come into control at some point. But Antichrist, or actually Antichrists, are how the letter from one of the letters from John describes false prophets, those who puff themselves up to seem like Christ, but are in fact there only to sow division. We hear of that in the little extra verse we heard there, and then Jesus reassures us that he'd been, well, in fact, that what he was talking about here at last is for the future. He'd been walking and talking and focused on the present of all that needs to be done before the next age can come in, before the next and good time can come along. To, read that people need to do this, such a basic thing of just knowing the signs of what is coming. This is echoed, of course, more famously in knowing the signs of the times, and even in the sort of bizarre to us episode in other Gospels of Jesus. Actually, also in Mark, it is depicted of Jesus cursing the fig tree. which is not ready in the that its time is not right when it is needed. And so what good is it? So Jesus draws this comparison again at the end of our verses here. Speak of a master, a lord of the house going on a journey, going away and leaving others in charge. Now, this is a comparison. This is a metaphor, a story, a parable that like frame that Jesus uses over and over and over again. So we have to assume that it was something that happened routinely, I guess. That one of the great that then as now one of the greatest luxuries is travel. One of the greatest luxuries is to go on these journeys. That the world was opening up, that the world was safe, or more or less, so at least the rich could be assured of crossing international borders, going abroad, and a couple of things, being able to do business, but also being assured that they would meet people who spoke their own language, actually. This is both through the sort of universal use of Greek that had been going on for several centuries at this point, and also because the great spread of Phoenician and then Greek and then Roman cities and traders and that kind of thing had allowed for Jews to spread out over the entire world by this point. That at this point um, the the Romans collected taxes for the Jewish temples such that people could live in any corner of the world and contribute what they were religiously obligated to give to the temple. And it would be collected and brought to the temple. Like it was a guarantee that wherever you went, there would be people who looked and dressed and acted like you. And this is pretty unusual, pretty extraordinary, pretty strange. So I guess more and more, and maybe there's still some novelty to it, because Jesus keeps using it as something that people paid attention to. Because, of course, if the leader of the community, leader of a household, and this is often a pretty significant household, these were less like employees and more like the the economic system that we sort of have to look at for the ancient world is called a patronage system, which is really that you don't really no one really owns anything and no one really trades anything in there, and money is used as part of trade. But what you really have and what's really of value is patronage, is either that you have people who in fact owe you devotion because you take care of them and so they work for you, or and then at the same time you owe your position, your circumstance, and your ability to have enough resources to take care of all these people who then work for you to add to your wealth. You owe that ability to other people who are higher on the totem than you. And this goes all the way up to the emperor. And of course, this system works extremely well basically until, unless there's more than one emperor, which during times of crisis there often would be, and would go all the way up and until there was a rival to the authority of the emperor, which was really once we came into the supremacy of the Pope, or of the great and significant archbishops and patriarchs, that they would butt heads because they had supreme authority for patronage, supreme economic authority, because it's very much intermingled with political or religious authority, which are deeply connected. So you really have a triangle there, and it's about patronage. So when Jesus tells this kind of story, tells this kind of parable, this is, we have to assume, something that happens all the time. And probably everyone in the audience, everyone who is listening, would have known an instance when something like this happened and it went wrong. It went very badly wrong. perhaps some destitute like relative of theirs who they don't talk about anymore had fallen afoul of a situation like this, had been entrusted to take care of something great, and had failed very, very badly, and now was an outlaw, living off the land, or part of a group of bandits or something, and just probably you expect to never see them again. Because these kinds of circumstances, these kinds of situations are so important. And you would think, but it's so easy to just look after, like house sitting is something that we leave to teenagers these days. House sitting is an extremely simple and easy job. But no, it's more important than that. It's incredibly challenging at the time. These households are full of a lot of different people. These households have a lot going on in them. But it's fundamentally looking after things of value. And so Jesus draws this comparison by saying, imagine how much significance we put on these mere earthly things. Just think of what kind of significance to these eternal and heavenly things. Now, you are being entrusted with these eternal and heavenly things. And I tell you, the care of these eternal and heavenly things will come due within the lifetime of some who are still here. And that all of this will pass away and we will pass into a new era. And that new era will be full of new opportunities. Now, this is one of the great challenges of scriptural interpretation, especially of gospel interpretation, because this is normally taken as meaning that Jesus will come back within 70 years of this time. So by the year, just for round numbers, by the year 100 AD. 100 AD is, of course, 1,920 years ago. So Jesus is 1,920 years late. And we have to either come up with some other interpretation, or perhaps pass this as a credit to the author of creative interpretation of what Jesus had said. Because it's best understood that the Gospel according to Mark was written about 50 years later, so about in the year 70, or 75, and was, which coincides with some pretty significant events. That is the first of the Jewish revolts, the first of the great Roman armies that came and besieged Jerusalem and threw down all the high places and destroyed a lot of the city and a lot of the community and a lot of the land, and killed a lot of the leadership within the broader community. And also the revolt that overturned the temple system and destroyed the lending houses and the book of records of debts. To create the world anew was their goal, certainly. And in 70, yes, but to a greater extent, another 50 years later, in about the year 130, was the second Jewish revolt, when Jerusalem was basically destroyed, leveled really right to the ground, and rebuilt as a totally different city where it was officially illegal and punishable by death for any Jew to set foot in that city. It was, in effect, the end of the world. But it made that community of settlements all across the world that were once satellites of this heart of the Jewish world in Jerusalem, it made them, it made everywhere the Jewish world. It made everywhere the Jewish community. Without that center, rabbinical Judaism, Judaism we know now, and really the parallel and the opportunity that Christianity had to develop as being a religion of the book rather than a faith of a particular place. Because remember, our sacred scriptures weren't even written down at all until the first exile, until there was some danger of them being lost. If everything is safe and secure, no one looks out for anything. But it's a conflicted and complicated question. Is exile, is diaspora, is being spread out and scattered such that you are everywhere, can that actually be considered a good thing? And I mean, one of the most challenging things for the early disciples, despite it being Christ's final and most emphatic instruction, is go and make disciples of all nations. But they didn't really want to do it. The book of Acts and the first few decades after Jesus' death are really a story of reluctance and resistance and hesitation, and mostly a failure to really spread out or, or or evangelize well beyond the normal realm, in spite of their best efforts to keep things close and tight to the vest. The faith spread, and the faith was everywhere, and that they would go to different places and find Christians already there because of such efforts as the letter writing, because of the open letters of Paul and probably thousands of other people like him, who prepared the way for Christ to come, metaphorically at least. And that perhaps when Mark writes of the coming in clouds of glory and of death and of the sun going dark, it sounds an awful lot like the Emperor Vespasian and his army coming to completely revamp and turn over the world, and to give the community the opportunity again, though an opportunity born out of death, a tragic opportunity, but an opportunity to live up to that Great Commission. Scriptural interpretation is hard. Scriptural interpretation is complicated, even with these familiar texts that may even come off as pretty straightforward. But Jesus spoke, and then the gospel writers wrote in ways that make them timeless, that make them engaging, that make it exciting to still be talking about these things 2,000 years later. So I'll leave it at that. Remember, of course, that first Sunday of Advent will be rebroadcast in about half an hour. Second Sunday of Advent, the Sunday of Peace, featuring Mary Hoadley, will be on this coming Sunday, right here on NEKTV at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then, of course, it's available on YouTube now and anytime. So, wherever you are, stay safe, especially this time. Especially now. We are in the midst of our local pandemic. We are in the midst of our local greatest challenge. Stay safe. Do good work. Keep in touch, and we'll see you again soon.